If you're talking, Tom, we can't hear you. God damn, this tea is good.
Rip Tom.
Well, hey, what's going on? We're back in the Brumaire, and fortunately, our beloved Tom.
I'm here.
You did not die of COVID-19. So,
not yet. Not yet.
So the international proletariat has, chalk one up in the win column. All right.
Yeah.
It's been a hell of a crisis, but we didn't lose one of our treasured intellectuals. So
intellectuals, yeah, good one. I did go and cough all over and lick Boris Johnson's doorknob, so that seems to have worked pretty good.
A service to the proletariat.
Yeah. I did not lick his knob. I licked his doorknob. Let's just get that straight.
It would have been funnier if you licked his other knob.
Somebody's going to edit this. Somebody is going to edit this. God damn it. Right. We're back today for the third one. The third of the 18th Brumaire. The second chapter and our third live stream. Who do we have today? I'll just say all the names. You get one word. You can only say one word each. So choose it wisely when I introduce you. Okay. All the way from Canada, we've got the butcher's apron himself, Kyle.
Tricolor.
Nearly two words. All the way from God knows where, Esri.
Party of Anarchy.
Bring it on. And then with her bosom display for all to see, it is Sophie.
Fuck.
There we go. Okay.
Keep your grubby Irish hands off my girl, Tom.
Yeah. And your ex-girl. Now, let's...
Oh. You want me to do an offensive Irish stereotype now? I'll fight you for my honor.
Oh my God. Irish or Scottish?
With apologies to Colin Meaney.
Man, do you know what I watched during the week? Con Air. I think it's Con Air recently.
Oh yeah, O'Brien's in that shit.
He is so bad in that. Like, he tries to do an American accent, and he literally can't do one. Like, it's like everybody can do an American accent because you've got so much in media. But Colin Meaney, he's such a freaking dub. He can't actually do one. He just sounds like an angry fucking dub. It's ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. Right here, I'm just...
You're a traitor to your nation.
What's going on?
Rip.
Okay, let me just find the 18th Brumaire here on Marxist.org. How about that? So we can put it up on the screen for people. Chapter 2. We got the downfall of the motherfucking Republicans. Okay, let me share this to the screen.
I love just the shit slinging in this chapter. It's so wonderful.
Man,
Marx is the master of sass. He's the first sassy man.
He's so sassy.
He's a messy bitch.
Yeah,
He really is
true.
He really is.
Is it any wonder that the left is a abrasive hellhole? Considering the the Godfather and his prose.
Yeah, I wish people would stop trying to do that because he did it well, and no one since him has done it well.
Well, to be material about it, I think he's a dick because things are. There's some like laws of motion in the socialist left that makes all the dicks rise to the top, I suppose, and that's metaphorical dicks.
Well, it's the law of capitalist accumulation that does it, if you ask me. Hey,
Perhaps.
I'm
hoping it's not like some other broader process of selection, but that's another stream.
Well, I think there is some of that too, yeah, but also because our organizations are such incredibly badly designed by people who want them to be badly designed. Name me one where the General Assembly is the highest body in reality. Is there one of these Marxist sectlet ones? And the votes are not in public. the votes are private.
Yeah, I kind of miss the old General Assembly model instead of having some like shitty central committee. I mean, it was shitty having a General Assembly too, but it's just shitty having to deal with these people.
Was there ever a General Assembly model? Was that the first international on those lines?
Oh, I'm talking about like Occupy Wall Street and bullshit.
Oh, I'm not talking about that. Oh my god.
I wasn't talking about serious socialist organization, Tom.
Yeah. Oh my god. Okay. Occupy. That was painful. And Occupy, I must say. Okay. Imagine designing your organization to be explicitly exploitable by wreckers. You just try and design your organization to be optimally suited for wreckers. That's what Occupy was.
But Tom, we need consensus. Everyone has to agree.
Yeah. So what do we want for our pizza topping? Oh, here we go.
Block.
Yeah. I only eat 3 things. Only 3 things. So
Hawaiian deviationalists.
Oh my god.
Forming a Hawaiian deviationist faction. No ham.
Right, here, let's get on to this. Because I am fucking exhausted, so I want to get through this goddamn thing. Let's see how we get on. Okay, so today it's the second chapter, as they said here. What did they call it here? Marx.org. They call it the downfall of the Republicans. Okay, so we're going to talk today about how the Republicans basically screwed it up and let Louis Bonaparte in through the back door. The back door. There we go. Double entendres galore here today. Okay, so we got one thing we got to remember is we had in 1848 in February we had the revolution, and then in April we had the election of the Constituent National Assembly, whose job was to. Sorry, I just got Precious just dropped me an omelette there to me. Thank you, Precious. And their job was to basically get the constitution together and get some organic laws, as they call them, together. And in December of 1848, they elected the president, who turned out to be Louis Bonaparte, and at the same time, the National Assembly. So we got 2 bodies. We got this Constituent National Assembly going at the same time, some kind of like a constituent, like they're trying to come up with a constitution, some kind of like higher body. And then they also at the same time they also had the National Assembly, which is kind of like a parliament going. So that's our general background to all of this. Is there anything else anybody want to add before we get into the nitty-gritty on the general background? Are we all good?
We're all good. I'd like to talk about Marx's characterization of what these like Republicans, quote unquote, really are. Like, okay. I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here. I don't know how you want to do this.
How's about, yeah, so let me just highlight a few things, and maybe I think I have the ones that you kind of want to read here. Like, just as overall, he says here that under the bourgeois monarchy of Louis Philippe, it had formed the official. Okay, so he's going to talk about the bourgeois, the kind of the true. What did he call them here? The true Republican, the true bourgeois. Is that what he calls them? Not
the pure Republicans or the tricolor Republicans.
Yeah. No, the pure Republicans, because in a way they're actually alienated from, actual kind of expressions of bourgeois interests. And they were sort of an ideological clique around a respected sort of newspaper that Marx thought was, fake news, more or less.
So this is the National. And so let's read a bit here where he talks about what their role was, what the role of the National was here. Let me see. Why don't we just read this paragraph here? Lexi, do you want to give it a go?
Huh? What was that? I had something antiquated in my ear.
No, I just coughed into my.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
it's my previous host. What was that?
Esri, would you like to read this big paragraph here and
let's
see
do
if
it.
you can out-bombast Kyle? Let's see.
All right. God forbid if we run into any French. Okay. Me. Under the bourgeois monarchy of Louis Philippe, it had formed the official Republican opposition and consequently a recognized component part of the political world of the day. It had its representatives in the chambers and a considerable sphere of influence in the press. Its Paris organ, the National, was considered just as respectable in its way as the Journal des Débats, as the debate journal. Its character corresponded to this position under the constitutional monarchy. It was not a faction of the bourgeoisie held together by great common interests and marked off by specific conditions of production. It was a clique of Republican-minded bourgeois, writers, lawyers, officers, and officials that owed its influence to the personal antipathies of the country to Louis Philippe, to memories of the old republic, to the Republican faith of a number of enthusiasts, above all, however, to French nationalism, whose hatred of the Vienna treaties and of the alliance with England it stirred up perpetually. A large part of the following of the National had under Louis Philippe was due to this concealed imperialism, which would consequently confront it later, under the Republic, as a deadly rival in the person of Louis Bonaparte. It fought the aristocracy of finance, as did all the rest of the bourgeois opposition. Polemics against the budget, which in France were closely connected with fighting the aristocracy of finance, procured popularity too cheaply and material for puritanical leading articles too plentifully to not be exploited. The industrial bourgeoisie was grateful for it, for its slavish defense of the French protectionist system, for it accepted, however, more on national grounds than on grounds of national economy. Which it accepted, however, more on national grounds than on the grounds of national economy. The bourgeoisie as a whole, for its vicious denunciation of communism and socialism. For the rest, the party of the National was purely Republican. That is, it demanded a Republican instead of monarchist form of bourgeois rule, and, above all, the lion's share of this rule. About the conditions of this transformation, it was by no means clear in its own mind. On the other hand, what was clear as daylight to it, and publicly acknowledged at the reform banquets in the last days of Louis Philippe, was its unpopularity with the democratic petty bourgeois, and in particular with the revolutionary proletariat. These pure Republicans, as is indeed the way with pure Republicans, were already at the point of contenting themselves, in the first instance, with a regency of the Duchess of Orleans, when the February Revolution broke out and assigned their best-known representatives a place in the provisional government. From the start, they naturally had the confidence of the bourgeoisie and a majority of the Constituent National Assembly. The socialist elements of the provisional government were excluded forthwith from the Executive Commission, which the National Assembly formed when it met, and the party of the National took advantage of the outbreak of the June insurrection to discharge the Executive Commission. And therewith to get rid of its closest rivals, the petty bourgeois or democratic Republicans. Okay, here's some names. All right.
Ledru Roland.
Ledru Roland, yeah.
Ledru Roland, etc. Cavaignac. All right. Cognac. What is that? All right. Cavaignac, the general of the Republican bourgeois part who commanded the June massacre, took the place of the Executive Commission with a sort of dictatorial power. Marx, former editor-in-chief of the National, became the perpetual president of the Constituent National Assembly and the ministries, as well as all other important posts, fell to the portion of the pure Republicans.
Okay, so that's a kind of a good roundup as to what the pure Republicans were. What do we think?
Oh, it's so good.
I think he's a sassy bitch.
Oh, it's so sassy.
I hope I did the sass justice.
Oh, snap.
These pure Republicans, as it is indeed the way with pure Republicans, were already at the point of contenting themselves in the first instance with the regency of the Duchess of Orleans. It's just
Boom.
instantly give up on republicanism.
Tom, we have a new challenger appears.
We have a new challenger appears. We have here. We have a return of the table meister himself, Emmanuel. Yes. How's it going? How's lockdown? Is there a lockdown? There's no lockdown where you are.
There's no lockdown, but there's mandatory social distancing and quarantining and stuff like that. So you're allowed to leave your home. You just you can't.
So no different than to normal life. So just normal Sweden then.
Yes.
Just mandatory social distancing.
Well, I expect, especially the northern regions, don't expect much of a difference.
Indeed.
But yeah, so I mean, as with everyone else in the world, haven't seen friends or family for a very long time, and so on. But it's nice to be able to leave the house and go on walks, and you can still shop and so on. But just don't do anything fun.
Yeah, got to give up licking the handrails in your local shop or going into your church and licking all the seats. That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Got to stop doing that.
It's terrible.
National pastimes.
There seems to be a lot of disinformation being spread about what the Swedish policy actually is and stuff like that. That's a different topic, but I feel especially the international media is kind of spinning in Sweden they're ignoring lockdowns and they're not doing anything and everyone is dying and blah blah blah. But yeah, that's another topic. So glad to be back.
It's been too long.
Yeah, it's been far too long, and it turns out I still can't do time zones right. I thought we were going to start in 20 minutes.
It's all good. It's all good. Just glad to have you.
Are you on summer on daylight savings time in the UK?
Maybe yes. Yeah, we are. Yeah, I've said 6 p.m. GMT, so I think I'm GMT +1 now or something. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Because 6 GMT is in 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I got that right.
Yeah.
You can't actually lose
GMT +1, and I'm in GMT +2.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
That's very my fault. I say GMT because I just think that's the time it is in London, but that's wrong.
No, that would be the time in Greenwich, my dear.
Well, I actually live in Greenwich, so it's like it's my fucking time. My fucking time. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So we just did one of the big first paragraphs there, where Marx basically described who and how crappy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. How bad, who and how shitty the pure Republicans were. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have anything to say about? I know I don't. We can read all this shit for ages and fucking ages. So it's hard to know. Okay. Any comments on this? Like, it seems to me kind of obvious that these pure Republicans would always kind of fall over and be happy with the new different king, because is that not always the way with kind of liberal Republicans, this type a lot of the time?
A lot of the time, yes. For example, in Canada, among the Liberals, there's a very tiny faction of what you might call pure Republicans who are insistent on liberal republicanism, but they have absolutely no influence as a whole since the 60s. And most of them are completely content with constitutional monarchy. It's very unusual that like once the liberals get power, they actually give a shit about this.
Yeah, like what really drives them is the I don't know what really drives them is allowing the bourgeoisie to have power and not actually to actually rip the power, like to formally destroy the head. Like if you look at Europe, right? You got royalty in England, you got royalty in Spain, you got royalty in Sweden, you got royalty in Netherlands. Like you got it's actually, I'd say it's at least 50% of European states still have royal families. You know, even in parts of Germany, they still have princes and shit in Germany. Now, they're not actual, but they still have their old titles, you know, not so much in the Eastern ones, but like, it's just like, to me, it's like, I suppose anywhere where Stalin got his hands on, where they tended to get rid of the kings and queens. But like, if you go like the Western part of Europe, it's pretty much 50-50. You still have a king in Sweden, don't you? There's king in Denmark. There's king in Belgium. There's king in Holland. There's king in Spain. You know, there's king.
Yeah, isn't it the case that none of the Nordic social democracies are republics?
Is there a king of Finland? Finland.
Oh, yeah, Finland's a republic. Right.
There is the king of rock. There is none higher.
The king of pop. I was also going to bring up, wasn't 1848 that revolution basically kind of, it started because of the state's bungling of the response to the banquets, and the intent was never really like to revolt, but to just reform and make like a better constitutional monarchy. So even the birth of the republic itself, and he probably gets into this, I don't remember, but the birth of the republic itself was an accident and never really the attention of the so-called Republicans.
Yeah, like it was actually the proletariat that brought it on, that actually decided.
It was the proletariat who did the fighting, but it was the state's bungling of their response that kind of started up the whole thing, basically.
Let's read this little sub-paragraph here. See what they say.
There's one more thing I want to talk about, unless this is a direct follow-up. Just the note about the aristocracy of finance. So not only are we struggling against, the monarchist faction, but there's essentially a financial faction that Marx doesn't identify with the bourgeoisie.
Yeah, because the aristocracy of finance is associated with the Orleanists, right? They would be willing to ally with the Duchess of Orleans, who was also allied with the aristocracy of finance. And we also saw this, in the recent episode of Revolutions, we see that, there is a constitutional monarchist faction that forms after the revolution of 1905 in Russia, which is associated with, the big bourgeoisie, this kind of aristocracy of finance, not even really interested in republicanism because they know they're going to get some kind of vote in whatever kind of constitutional monarchist arrangement is set up.
Oh, the Septembrists or something?
Decembrists.
I think the Decembrists were.
Oh right, those were the
sailors or
right wing.
I don't remember that stuff.
Republicans, but yeah. Anyway,
cut all my comments out.
No, it's fine. This is just what is it? Yeah, the aristocracy of finance is going to be directly funding the state coffers, right? So they kind of always get a vote, except in the most absolutist arrangement.
Okay, so I interpreted this a little bit differently, and for the viewers or listeners out there, I'm not reading this in English. I'm reading the Swedish translation, specifically for this kind of purpose, in order to sort of weed out if I get a different impression.
Sorry, Emmanuel, are you tapping your fingers or something? There's like a kind of a
no, but my dog is chewing on a bone.
That would be it. Yeah.
I can.
Precious little dog.
I'll lower the gain here a little bit.
I hope that was lowering the gain and not boosting it. Is that better?
Yeah, but now you're quiet as fuck, so it's a trade-off. Anyway, pet your doggo for me.
All right. No, but so the way I read this is that he paints this picture of on the one hand a very loose coalition of bourgeois interests of lawyers and accountants and whatnot who are Republicans, and as with the rest of the bourgeois opposition, against the financial aristocracy. So from what I gather of like the playing field here, you have one team of like I guess I would say like a classical liberal faction of basically like a managerial class, like a secular managerial class, against a more sort of traditional aristocracy and monarchy friendly financial elite. And that one of the things here is that like the call for modernization and secularization and so on. He doesn't mention secularization specifically, but so this Republican faction is, they're all about life, liberty, and Bentham and all the rest of it, and so they don't like those elites who are in league with the monarchy, essentially. But when it comes, when push comes to shove, they still don't hesitate to ally with not the monarchy, but still, wealthy, well-off individuals such as the Duchess of Orleans, in order to further their cause. So that's kind of how I read that.
But wouldn't allying with the Duchess of Orleans imply also not allying with Louis Philippe, but allying with the Orleanists to some degree?
Yeah, I think they were opposed they were like the loyal opposition to the Orleanists. Like the Orleanists was basically the super large bourgeois, the industrial and the finance large capital were happy enough there. But the smaller and lower down petty bourgeois, just the lawyers, the PMC, your professional managerial class, weren't happy with it because they weren't represented. We must remember at the time when Louis Philippe was king, they had an elected National Assembly. I don't know what it was called or whatever, but it only 1%, I think, of the electorate, right, of the 1% of the male population was actually able to vote, and there was lots of people who owned like pretty large amount of land and stuff, like, who weren't able to vote, and primarily that was who the nation that paper represented, and that's who the pure Republicans were. Like, if the pure Republicans, I bet you if they had a reform where they said 10% of you can now vote, there'd be no such thing as the pure Republicans. That's what defines them.
Yeah.
And just then later on, Marx talks about universal suffrage and everyone's right to equal vote, right? And how that sort of plays into hands. But yeah, okay, we'll get to that.
I just want to put an asterisk on Septemberists. What I meant was the Octoberists faction, and I thought it couldn't be Octoberists because Russia, right? Just to echo things about the previous. At the time of recording the last episode of Revolutions, where Mike Duncan leaves us hanging in 1905. Come on, Mike. And basically, there's a loyalist faction that's named after the Tsar's October Manifesto. So before 1917, October and Octoberist refers to this, like, essentially, it's not Republican. It doesn't express itself in a Republican way. It's a sort of right-wing constitutional monarchy faction that plays the loyal opposition.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's keep going.
Wait, look at this dog.
That is what do they call them? What type of dog is it again?
Oh,
This is a whippet.
A whippet, that's right. My uncle has a whippet. It was officially the dumbest dog ever. Is your dog dumb? Because my uncle's dog was so dumb.
He's not that dumb, but I mean he's not the smartest dog either.
Yeah, there's nothing behind their eyes. If you look at a whippet, if you look at a whippet's eyes, there's like nothing behind them.
They just nothing but love, Tom. Nothing but love and sentience.
They're empty, dark marbles. I'm telling you.
No,
my uncle had this dog called. He called it Whippy. You know, he thought a lot about the name. But he was a farmer, and he had like the dog would piss everywhere. I mean, it would just piss everywhere, no matter what you would do. You put it in your car, it would piss in the car. It would sneak into your bedroom, it would piss on your bed. It pissed everywhere. It was a goddamn nightmare. And he would look at you so dumbly and so stupidly, you couldn't be mad with him. But there was this time,
that's a dog that knows his game theory.
Yeah.
I feel that is not representative as a breed. You know?
Yeah.
And not all whippets.
That's right. And your sweet dog has a name and a personality. So let's not generalize about whippets, Tom. This is supposed to be a communist podcast.
My uncle he's a farmer, and he had like a guy from the Department of Agriculture come in to like check out some stuff, official. And the official went to go to his car, and the back seat of his car, he had a whole load of files. And he opened the door, and Whippy jumped in through his legs up into all his files, and he pissed on them all. And my uncle was like not having a good time.
He literally pissed on the government.
Yeah, literally. And my uncle was not having a good time with like this guy. He was like a real stickler for something or other, and he pissed all over all his files and destroyed them. And so they had to take them out of the car and bring them into the kitchen and lay them out near like the heaters and like have the piss dry off them. And your man's sitting there like stewing. Oh man, it made me laugh when I heard that. Fucking right. Anyway, let's keep
that. I'm sorry, but Tom, that whippet has done more to fight the bourgeois state than all of us combined.
It's true. Certainly more than me. I think it's like, has anybody ever read the book The Good Soldier Schweck?
Oh yeah, I had to read that for school when I was in Prague.
Man, it's fucking hilarious. But like, he has this brilliant way of wrecking people's heads where you can't tell whether he's an idiot or a genius, and that's like Whippy. He's like, he looks like a total idiot, but he did piss all over the guy's files. So we got to give him that.
That's right, Tom. That's right.
Okay.
I feel like Slavoj Žižek might have picked up a few tricks from Schweik.
Yeah, I reckon.
Those black marbles of strategy.
Okay, let's keep going. We're getting nowhere fast here today. Right. Okay, let me just read this little paragraph here. I underlined this one. I thought it was really nice. The Republican bourgeois faction, which had long regarded itself as the legitimate heir of the July monarchy, thus found its fondest hope succeeded. It attained power, however, not as it dreamed under Louis Philippe, through a liberal revolt of the bourgeoisie against the throne, but through a rising of the proletariat against capital, a rising laid low with grapeshot. What it had conceived as the most revolutionary event turned out, in reality, to be the most counter-revolutionary. The fruit fell into its lap, but it fell from the tree of knowledge, not from the tree of life. So what the hell does that last line mean? I don't know. I don't understand. I've tried to read it 100 times, but I don't get it. What is he getting at there, Kyle? Tell us.
Oh, well, it's like they came to understand how useless they were instead of actually winning, right? Like the tree of knowledge is like, oh no, you're actually just like this real paper tiger, and you're going to get completely bowled over by the forces of counter-revolution. And so the tree of life did not feed these pure Republicans.
It sums up the next few paragraphs where he goes into the very toothless expressions of universal rights that are like, you have a universal right to do X, except when, we feel like it would be bad. And of course the government will have to say it's okay, and all these like asterisk rights, basically. And there's also a sense throughout this whole pamphlet of, you know, what the liberal bourgeoisie thought was going to be a revolutionary event that would overthrow monarchy forever. Or, you know, what liberal republicanism thought was going to overthrow monarchy forever actually ended up more or less being part of how monarchies kept themselves alive.
Yeah, in the Swedish translation, it's actually pretty clear that it's Louis Philippe who actually dreams of, you know, the violent bourgeois revolution. It's so it is the
really.
Yeah, so but it came to power not as it under no sorry, I misread the Swedish translation as well. But yeah, I think that's a good point from Marx, that, you know, what got you into power in the end was not this sort of grandiose, you know, Roman revolution with pomp and circumstance, but it was from the fact that you just used the military to combat the proletarians half a year ago, and that kept all your opposition out of parliament, and then you just won by default.
Yeah, a rising laid low with grape shot, with a form of cannons.
And that's a reference to Napoleon, I think, as well, who said that in, was it 17-something, 99 or something, he scared off like the Enragé with the whiff of grape shot, you know, without it, you know, and they didn't even kill. I don't think he actually had to kill anybody. It was just the smell of it. Wasn't that right? Whereas in here, it's like they massacred them. It wasn't like just a whiff. It was like they slaughtered people. Let's read these little bits here that Lexi was going on about. There's only a couple of lines here. I'll read them. Just little snippets out of the lines.
Whomst?
Esri. Yeah, I was talking about somebody else there. I was talking.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Else I know, yeah.
Yeah.
God damn it! I'm tired. I'm not getting any of them right today at all. Okay, so let me go here.
It's COVID, Tom.
It is the COVID. Number 19. 19. 19. Okay. Now, does anybody remember that song, or is that just big in England? Was it Max Headroom? Does nobody know who I'm talking about there?
I know Max Headroom because he's Canadian and was in some other Canadian shows, and I saw posters of him like all over the place when I was a kid. So yeah, I know.
He had I think it was in England. It went very high up in the charts. It was about like the average age of a kid of people killed in, you know, U.S. soldiers in Vietnam was 19, and it was kind of like a rebel song. I don't know. I can't remember. That's the only thing. I don't know. It's been fucking about 20 years since I heard it. Okay, let me just read this fucking paragraph. Okay,
damn.
My brain is really fried. For each of these liberties is the inevitable general staff of the liberties of 1848: personal liberty, liberty of the press, of speech, of association, of assembly, of education and religion, etc., received a constitutional uniform which made them invulnerable. For each of these liberties is proclaimed as the absolute right of the French citizen, but always with the marginal note that it is unlimited so far as it is not limited by the equal rights of others and the public safety, or by laws which are intended to mediate just this harmony of the individual liberties with one another and with the public safety. For example, he gives a few here, like education is free. Freedom of education shall be enjoyed under the conditions fixed by law and under the supreme control of the state. And then one last bit. The Constitution, therefore, constantly refers to future organic laws which are put into effect, those marginal notes, and regulate the enjoyment of these unrestricted liberties in such manner that they will collide neither with one another nor with the public safety. And later these organic laws were brought into being by the Friends of Order, and all those liberties regulated in such manner that the bourgeoisie, in its enjoyment of them, finds itself unhindered by the equal rights of the other classes. Where it forbids these liberties entirely to the others, or permits enjoyment of them under conditions that are just so many police traps, this always happens solely in the interest of public safety. That is the safety of the bourgeoisie, as the Constitution prescribes. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and right before it, there's a lovely thing about universal suffrage, like Emmanuel was talking about.
Okay, do you want to read that?
Yeah, just the paragraph before the stuff. The new constitution was at bottom only the republicanized edition of the Constitutional Charter of 1830. The narrow electoral qualification of the July monarchy, which excluded even a large part of the bourgeoisie from political rule, was incompatible with the existence of the bourgeois republic. In lieu of this qualification, the February Revolution had at once proclaimed direct universal suffrage. The bourgeois republicans could not undo this event. They had to content themselves with adding the limiting proviso of 6 months' residence in the constituency. The old organization of the administration, the municipal system, the judicial system, the army, etc., continued to exist inviolate, or where the inviolate, or where the Constitution changed them. The change concerned the table of contents, not the contents. The name, not the subject matter.
I mean, we'll get to this later when he talks about like the president and the parliament, but like just here, I think this still holds up as a scathing critique of the U.S. political system. I mean, that right there is like bong rip stuff, man.
No, I mean that's absolutely what was echoing through my head as we were doing that. As I was reading this, you know, I was like, oh God, like, yeah, I have nothing but disappointed noises.
You know, anyone who's lived here for 6 months. Damn it! How can we keep people from voting if everyone's supposed to vote?
Sorry to be so disorganized, but as an asterisk, whiff of grape shot was probably Thomas Carlyle talking about Bonaparte, like, you know, massacring some Republicans, more or less, and it wasn't just a smell of grape shot.
Yeah.
Oh, it was a massacre, was it?
It was a massacre, yeah.
OG Bonaparte, not Louis.
Could you read the sentence with grape shot again? I want to see what that is in Swedish because I don't recognize it. I didn't recognize it when you read it. The Republican. All right, yeah. So it's with the July. Right.
It's in like the fourth
The
sentence.
Swedish translation just says the
fourth line.
The victory against the proletariat with military power. So it just says, you know, by military power, they queased the rebellion.
That sounds like a shitty translation to me.
Sounds like a bad translation.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think
Translator just gave up because it was a reference that wouldn't translate well.
Yeah, probably. Maybe there may be a different word, I guess, in Swedish for grape shot. I don't know.
I mean,
perhaps
it isn't there at all. It's just it was, you know, it was subdued with military might.
Is there like a translator's note or a footnote that might explain that? It's like difficult to translate or something? No?
Okay, let's go on. Let's not have it turn the whole thing into a translation discussion.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Duolingo podcast.
Yeah. I've started doing Duolingo to relearn Irish.
Hell yeah.
Fuck me. I wasn't wrong by remembering how bad the Irish grammar is. It's fucking totally insane. But that's a talk for another day. I'm trying to find in this goddamn I'm trying to find a piece to go to next. So there's a bit here where Marx, he starts talking about kind of like the importance of kind of structures. Yeah. So I know we always have Derek here, and Derek's always going on about, oh yeah, well, you know, there are so many different things at the state level with the Democrats, this and that, and they're in there by law, and like blah 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 blah. Derek is right. You know, let's see what Marx is going to say about a similar thing where he talks about like the structure of the Constitution and the effect that it had. Okay.
Oh, I was just going to mention an anecdote here. My advisor in my MA program, who is a student of Marcuse, used to say that Marcuse, when you talk about the German Revolution, he'd always say, "I started to suspect something was wrong when they went to elect the officers of the revolution, and they elected all the same people who had to their previous positions just under a revolutionary garb." And I feel like that's very much this, the table of contents, not the contents themselves kind of revolution.
Yeah, okay. Whenever Marx has content, whenever he says content, he's usually thinking about, class content as well.
Maybe. Are you sure about that? I'm not.
I mean, usually sprinkling a bit of the old dialectic on that statement. Because, yeah, he's talking about forms of power. They're not actually transforming the republic. But, part of that is also not actually transforming the monarchy. And part of that is also, a description of the balance of class forces is not actually changed there.
Okay, Kyle, do you want to give the next bit of a go from where I underline here, probably down to about there?
All right, in the sequel. All right.
Actually, there's a big long section here that we can read, so we can split it up however you want from in the sequel on. You can split it up maybe halfway down the next paragraph. I know it's quite a big chunk to read in one go.
Okay. In the sequel, both sides accordingly appeal with complete justice to the Constitution, the Friends of Order, who abrogated all these liberties, as well as the Democrats, who demanded all of them. For each paragraph of the Constitution contains its own antithesis, its own upper and lower house, namely liberty in the general phrase, abrogation of liberty in the marginal note. Thus, so long as the name of freedom was respected and only its actual realization prevented, of course in a legal way, the constitutional existence of liberty remained intact, inviolate, however mortal the blows dealt to its existence in actual life. This Constitution, made inviolable in so ingenious a manner, was nevertheless, like Achilles, vulnerable in one point. Not in the heel, but in the head, or rather in the two heads it wound up with. The Legislative Assembly on the one hand, the President on the other. Glance through the Constitution and you will find only the paragraphs in which the relationship of the President to the Legislative Assembly is defined are absolute, positive, non-contradictory, and cannot be distorted. For here, it was a question of the bourgeois Republicans safeguarding themselves. Articles 45 to 70 of the Constitution are so worded that the National Assembly can remove the President constitutionally, whereas the President can remove the National Assembly only unconstitutionally, only by setting aside the Constitution itself. Here, therefore, it challenges its forcible destruction. It not only sanctifies the division of powers like the Charter of 1830, it widens it into an intolerable contradiction. The play of the constitutional powers, as Guizot termed the parliamentary squabble between the legislative and executive power, is in the Constitution of 1848 continually played va-banque. On one side are 750 representatives of the people, elected by universal suffrage and eligible for re-election. They form an uncontrollable, indissoluble, indivisible National Assembly, a National Assembly that enjoys legislative omnipotence, decides in the last instance on war, peace, and commercial treaties, alone possesses the right of amnesty, and by its permanence, perpetually holds the front of the stage. On the other is the President, with all the attributes of royal power, with authority to appoint and dismiss his ministers independently of the National Assembly, with all the resources of the executive power in his hands, bestowing all posts and disposing thereby in France of the livelihoods of at least 1.5 million people, for so many depend on the 500,000 officials and officers of every rank. He has the whole of the armed forces behind him. He enjoys the privilege of pardoning individual criminals, of suspending National Guards, of discharging with the concurrence of the Council of State, general, cantonal, and municipal councils elected by the citizens themselves. Initiative and direction are reserved to him in all treaties with foreign countries. While the Assembly constantly performs on the boards and is exposed to daily public criticism, he leads a secluded life into the Elysian fields, and with Article 45 of the Constitution before his eyes and in his heart, crying to him daily, "Frère, il faut mourir," brother, one must die. Your power ceases on the second Sunday of the lovely month of May in the 4th year after your election. Then your glory is at an end. The piece is not played twice, and if you have debts, look to it quickly that you pay them off with the 600,000 francs granted you by the Constitution, unless, perchance, you'd prefer to go to Clichy on the second Monday of the lovely month of May. Thus, whereas the Constitution assigns power to the president, it seeks to secure moral power for the National Assembly. Apart from the fact that it is impossible to create a moral power by paragraphs of law, the Constitution here abrogates itself once more by having the president elected by all Frenchmen through direct suffrage, while the votes of France are split up among the 750 concentrated on a single individual. While each separate representative of the people represents only this or that party, this or that town, this or that bridgehead, or even only the mere necessity of electing someone as the 750th without examining too closely either the cause or the man, he is the elect of the nation, and the act of his election is the trump that the sovereign people plays once every 4 years. The elected National Assembly stands in a metaphysical relation, but the elected president in a personal relation to the nation. The National Assembly indeed exhibits in its individual representatives the manifold aspects of the national spirit. But in the president, this national spirit finds its incarnation. As against the Assembly, he possesses a sort of divine right. He is president by grace of the people.
Wow, that's just brilliant stuff. Like, so it seems like so obvious when you just say apply to, say, like actual presidential policies at the moment, like say France is one and America is another. It's goddamn is the president is the focus of everything. Nobody gives a damn about these little small representatives, the House of Representatives, the Senate. Say compared to say somewhere like Ireland, where the president is like a joke. It's all about like the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister, or in the UK, you know, it's not about the Queen. It's all about like Boris Johnson. So it's like these structures do matter, you know, they really matter, and you know, and how these things are structured will determine a lot of strategy and the politics going forward. Kyle, you're nodding.
Yeah, I guess it's important to note that the president in this case still had the power of appointing officials, which gave him a sort of natural support base. And then also the Assembly directly blocked any kind of positive relationship with the people, right? Like they were basically negating all of the liberties in the margins. And so, you know, their kind of diffuse presence as a representative of the popular just didn't mean anything because they weren't actually providing the goods. Whereas Bonaparte, did have that advantage of being the incarnation of the nation, in addition to having a whole bunch of people on his payroll that he could, you know, mobilize to his side.
I read that kind of differently in this huge chunk of a paragraph, in that he says that the 750 representatives in the Legislative Assembly, he, in the Swedish translation, he really makes it sound like they are supposed to be the fair representation, and he treats them as if they are. So, like, on the one hand, you have a fair representation of the actual country, embodied by 750 representatives, including representatives of people who just don't care, right? And who just vote for someone in order to vote. On the other hand, on the one hand, but then on the other hand, you have this president dude who has the power of the military branch, etc., and who gets the national attention, and who is supposed to be the like the living embodiment of the nation. And those two are incompatible, because on one side you have debate and quabble, and a slice, like a representative sample of the actual nation, which is quabbling all the time, and different interests, etc. And on the other hand, you have this absolute authority figure who really embodies like the national spirit, and so people just stop caring about the legislative assembly, and it attains this sort of metaphysical relationship, just like I don't know. I've read U.S. politics. I still don't know how the Senate works. I still have no fucking clue what the fuck they do, right?
They shouldn't be there. That's what they do.
Right. So that's kind of what I understood by
but
that.
I think
that it is metaphysical for me, whereas Trump kind of embodies Merca.
Hell yeah.
But the thing as well as here must be noted is that Napoleon won the election, I think about 85% of the vote. So he was like an absolute landslide. And he wasn't front and center once he won, even though he had executive authority. All the laws and all the stuff that's in the papers about what's this new law going to be, what's this organic law, blah, blah, blah. That was all being done in the assembly. And so they take all the heat, and he can sit on the sidelines going, oh, this is terrible, look at me. And he's able to play against it. So, like, that's not,
right.
I think he's in a much stronger position, say, than you would look at, say, a Trump today, because Trump's elected on 25% of the vote or something like that. 50% people vote, and only half of them vote for him.
That's partially true. I think there's still a lot of parallels to Trump and the U.S. that I found kind of eerie. It obviously isn't like a one-to-one comparison, but Trump does the same kind of move where he pits himself as like the true embodiment of real America against this political class of the Senate, which is metaphysical and doesn't do anything. And he taps into that resentment, and like he's kind of not wrong. He's wrong about a lot of things, but like our fucking senators do suck, and they're doing shit.
Yeah, this is something that Matt Christman brought up when he interviewed Mike Duncan. It's probably the only like full Chapo episode I've ever listened to. It's really good. You should check it out if you haven't. But yeah, like. And Mike Duncan kept kind of deflecting the Trump comparisons, being like, nah, you don't understand. Louis Napoleon had like some cred. He wrote books about, like he wrote things about relief to the poor before. He wasn't like a reality TV embodiment of a boss. But more or less, I think what Manuel's trying to get at is just, the basic thesis of the paragraph. That I love that, the Constitution has its Achilles heel in its head, in that, it creates a metaphysical assembly of weak ninnies that, even though they're supposed to hold the power, they're going to be swept aside by the the big Rambo in the middle.
Yeah, and I think so. Like the way I read this is not that he's talking specifically about Louis Napoleon here. He hasn't gotten into the fact that he won the election or anything yet, but I think he's making the systematic point that if you set a system up like this, where on the one hand you're supposed to have representatives in the entire country in some sort of council and they make the laws, but on the other hand, the dude who actually enforces those laws and has complete control of the fucking army is one dude, you're in for a hell of a ride, and at the end of the day, the president can, if the president does anything illegal, like say stays for longer than he should, the president can always, has a trump card, pun intended, and to call, you and whose army are going to stop me exactly. So that's kind of what I read into that rather about this being specifically about this. It's a systematic critique of
Emmanuel,
kind of political system.
Emmanuel, you said whose army? It should be obvious to us all. The resistance. The resistance is going to ride in.
Oh yeah.
Horseback. Right. Tank back.
Yeah, history on tank back.
Yeah, with the CNN flags flying.
Oh God, no.
And pussy hats. Don't forget the pussy hats.
Oh, the pussy hats.
No.
When you read this, like when you call back to the first paragraph in this entire essay, like history repeats itself first as a tragedy and then as farce, and you read this, and he thinks that this is farcical, and I'm like,
right.
Oh, dude, you should wait until you see the U.S., man. Like
first as farce, then as farce of a farce.
Yeah, it's farces all the way down.
Yeah.
Speaking of farces, I need to correct my earlier correction about the whiff of grape shot. Napoleon Bonaparte was called in on the Republican side to massacre a sort of royalist crowd, more or less. And with the whiff of grape shot, Thomas Carlyle, I think English reactionary historian, British reactionary historian, essentially thought that this ended the revolution and also established Napoleon as someone that wasn't just like a low-level commander, but as someone that could command great armies. So,
did he massacre them? Like, was there a large massacre?
Yeah, there was hundreds dead in the streets.
Were they royalists?
Yes. Yeah,
Good.
it was a sort
Good.
of no, but it was a royalist revolt. It was a royalist revolt that the Republic crushed, and in crushing created the conditions within itself for the rise of Napoleon.
Yeah. Okay, so let's.
So you can copy and paste that over all the things that were wrong that we said.
I will indeed. Okay. Lovely. A complicated edit. Just what I like. Now.
Feel you.
So I yesterday or the day before yesterday I edited 3 episodes, full episodes, and I recorded a half an episode, and I nearly wanted to shoot myself in the face.
How do you do that shit? It takes me like a week to edit an episode, and like a good week. My God. I
did about 10 hours editing straight. I just put my glasses on. I had a bad night's sleep. I couldn't do any proper programming work, so I said, right, I'm just going to slaughter myself here. Okay, now.
All the weed and Xanax in the world can't get me to do 10 hours editing.
Yeah, it's a killer. Right. Okay, so now we're going to get on to kind of what I love. Like Marx is going to point out this kind of idea of how they thought they were the bourgeois, the pure Republicans were so smart that they could like, just manufacture clauses in the Constitution that would definitely never lead to them ever losing power. This kind of idea of like, liberals believing in the law as in like somehow power is subordinate to the law when law, the other way around. It just reminds me of all the stuff that was going on about Brexit. There was constantly lawyers going to the Supreme Court in England saying, oh, but what about this clause here? This goes against this other micro clause and this other thing over here. And everybody was just like, they get thrown out every single time. It just really reminds me of it. So let me just read this little paragraph here. They sought to cheat destiny by a catch in the Constitution through Article 3, according to which every motion for a revision of the Constitution must be supported by at least 3/4 of the votes cast in 3 successive debates, with an entire month between each, with added proviso that not less than 500 members of the National Assembly must vote. Thereby, they made the impotent attempt to continue exercising a power when only a parliamentary minority as which they already saw themselves prophetically in their mind's eye, a power which, at that time, when they commanded a parliamentary majority and all the resources of governmental authority, was daily slipping more and more from their feeble hands. I really like that. I really like that analysis.
Yeah, and that is very reminiscent of, or Brexit is very reminiscent of this. I agree with that. That it's these kinds of attempts to resort to like proceduralism, like procedural blocking. It's the same kind of thing that they did with Brexit.
This reminds me of all the sort of like National Lawyers Guild type of activism, or
it's the
a lot of the this is unconstitutional kind of stuff that you see going on. That this falls on deaf ears. No one gives a shit.
It's like watching Democracy Now. It's like
oof.
Seriously, it is. Who do they have on? They always have, what's that? The Civil Liberties Union. It's basically the Civil Liberties.
Yeah, ACLU.
ACLU. Okay. Now we're going to get into basically, the what happened to make the military suddenly think for themselves, like, hey, why can't we get in on a bit of this action? Yeah, we're the guys with all the guns. What about us? So, who wants to read a bit of this? Sophie.
I can do it. Do you start such was the Constitution?
Such was the Constitution, yeah, all the way down to nearly the second last. The bit I've highlighted there, if you can see it. I don't know if you're looking at that or something.
I can't really see it well, but I have it open on mine computer.
Down to citizens' purses.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Yeah. And see if you can out-bombast Kyle and Lexi.
Oh, God.
And who? And who? What was that?
God damn it! Esri!
Okay. Such was the Constitution of 1848, which on December 2nd, 1851, was not overthrown by head, but fell down at the touch of a mere hat. This hat, to be sure, was a three-cornered Napoleonic hat. While the bourgeois Republicans in the Assembly were busy devising, discussing, and voting this Constitution...
Devising,
sorry. Koviak? Did I pronounce that right? Cavagnac, sorry.
Why don't you try that sentence again, babe?
While the bourgeois Republicans in the Assembly were busy devising, discussing, and voting this Constitution, Cavaignac, outside the Assembly, maintained the state siege of Paris. The state of siege of Paris was the midwife of the Constituent Assembly in its travail of Republican creation. If the Constitution is subsequently put out of existence by bayonets, it must not be forgotten that it was likewise by bayonets, and these turned against the people, that it had to be protected in its mother's womb, and by bayonets that it had to be brought into existence. The forefathers of the respectable Republicans had sent their symbol, the tricolor, on a tour around Europe. They themselves, in turn, departments the state of siege. A splendid invention, periodically employed in every ensuing crisis in the course of the French Revolution. What's that second B word?
Bivouac.
Bivouac, okay. But barrack and bivouac, which were thus periodically laid on French society's head to compress its brain and render it quiet, saber and musket, which were periodically allowed to act as judges and administrators, as guardians and censors, to play policemen and do night watchman's duty, mustache and uniform, which were periodically trumpeted forth as the highest wisdom of society and its rector, were not barrack and boviac, saber and musket, mustache and uniform, finally bound to hit upon the idea of instead saving society once and for all by proclaiming their own regime as the highest and freeing civil society completely from the trouble of governing itself? Barrack and boviac, saber and musket, mustache and uniform were bound to hit upon this idea all the more as they might then also expect better cash payments for their higher services. Whereas from the merely periodic state of siege and transient rescues of society at the bidding of this or that bourgeois faction, little of substance was gleaned, save some killed and wounded, and some friendly bourgeois grimaces. Should not the military at least one day play state of siege in their own interest?
At last one day. Do you want to do it again? At last one day.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Should not the military at last one day play state of siege in their own interest and for their own benefit, and at the same time besiege these citizens' purses? Moreover,
that's enough. We don't need to laugh a bit, yeah. But okay. Anybody wants to discuss this paragraph? We've lost a few people.
Pretty straightforward, right? Like you resort to military force to suppress popular power enough times, and the military is just going to be like, hey, actually the thing that's regulating society is us. So why don't we get paid better, and why don't we get rid of these bleeding heart liberals who are always grimacing when they tell us to go kill a bunch of people in the streets?
Yeah, it's a basic point, and it's one of the biggest flaws, if not the biggest flaw of liberalism, is like what y'all were talking about earlier, that it's not law, it's not what's written on paper that's really important. It's, do you have the means to enforce what is on paper? And if you don't, all the flowery words in the world don't mean shit when you have a bullet in your head.
Yeah, like is it true that the Mexican Constitution today is the revolutionary one of 1915 or whatever?
Yes, as far as I understand it.
Yeah, and it's full of it's full of really radical stuff, and it's never ever enforced. And even though it's like in there in the goddamn Constitution, why not? Because the Constitution is obviously, it may be written, but it's not actually the power relations that exist in society. They're not there to enforce those ones, so they don't get enforced.
And one of the tragedies is that pretty quickly after the revolution and the Constitution was drafted, like things went astray, and kind of the final nail, according to a lot of people, is the amendments that were passed. I believe there were amendments that were passed in order to get NAFTA approved, which basically fucked over the provisions that were beneficial to the existing indigenous peoples in Mexico.
And you only have to look at the American Constitution, like all the stuff about privacy and all that. It's all gone. All that shit's gone.
I mean, there was a coup, like as more or less as soon as the Bill of Rights was passed, the courts were like, nah, none of these apply to the states. Like, and the states, like, for a while had to pass piecemeal each article of the Bill of Rights as applying to each state until, I believe, what was the 14th Amendment? Like, yeah.
Like religion, man. Well, you have to read the Bible next.
Yeah, so this is I really feel like the old vulgar Marxist distinction of base and superstructure pretty well describes the relation between constitutional law and actual powers that are supposedly secured by the law, but in fact have their own independent power base that the law may or may not, guarantee or be part of.
See, this is kind of interesting because, okay, is this better?
Yep. Yeah.
All right. So, what I run into this is not so much. I mean, partially, the you and whose army argument that you all just made with the military. If you don't have the power to actually enforce the laws, yada yada, they can't be enforced, and so legalism is idealism and all the rest of it. And I agree with that in principle. But what I read into this is more a sort of stab at the bourgeoisie for giving them for giving the military the power to enact all of this, because he makes the point like, okay, you made the military judge, juror, and executioner, all of these in all of these cases. Like, if you give the military these kinds of powers, they're going to figure out that they're going to gain that experience, and they're going to figure out to use it against you. So I didn't read it as much as you and whose army are going to enforce the laws. I read it as a specific jab against the bourgeoisie that if you use the military as judge, juror, and executioner, they're going to play judge, juror, and executioner. But I didn't read it as a general comment about this applies to any sort of military regardless. I read it as a kind of specific point against this specific revolution when where they use the military in this specific case, and also crucially where the president has the power over that military that the bourgeoisie themselves taught how to rule. Essentially, so that's kind of. Yeah, sorry, Sophie, go ahead.
No, I totally agree with what you're saying, and I think Marx is making a very specific point here about this revolution and how it went wrong. Tom touched on your point too, though, briefly when we first started talking about this. Basically stating that when you keep ordering the army to shoot down protesters and stuff like that, uprisings, and you're not paying them well, and all they get from you is your bourgeois grievances that, slaughtering people, they are going to be like, well, we're the ones who are actually shoring up power. Why aren't we getting paid better? So the point I was making earlier about a kind of a blind spot of liberalism, not realizing that the thing that matters is the guns and not the words, I think still applies, but that blind spot only becomes a bigger issue and a crisis of political power when there are certain mistakes or missteps made, along these lines. You're constantly ordering the military to shoot down citizens, but not paying them enough, right? So that's why if it was a guarantee for the army to turn against a republic, then we would have seen this happen to nearly every republic. But, there has to be specific missteps for that to turn into a real crisis of legitimate power.
They should have given the soldiers a bonus for every socialist they shot dead. What do you reckon? Give them 100 francs per commie. That would have done it.
No, but also from the logic of their own
approach to military governance.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, he does kind of make that point in the first chapter, right? With when you have incentives for legislators and rulers to get rid of dissenters in the interest of public safety to save society. The more you do that, the more unsafe society becomes, and the more it needs to be saved. That's kind of akin to give a soldier a bonus for shooting a commie, and all of a sudden everyone's a fucking commie, right?
Well, here's hoping. Right, let's let's move it on. We're going to. Sorry, Ezra, did you have something to say there? Somebody have something to say before I moved it? No. Okay. So let's go on here to the next bit where they talk about the election of.
I'm sorry. I did have one thing I wanted to say. I'm terribly sorry. Other than not being overthrown by a head, but fell down at the touch of a hat being a fire line. Can we talk a little bit about mustache and uniform?
Oh yes. Why did we? How did we not say anything?
Because I just use mustache as shorthand for, Tsarist, for Stalinist autocracy and, Tsarist autocracy and, these different monarchical forms that pop up here and there. But to see Marx use it.
But I think the mustache was actually very, very associated with military men at the time as well.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
At the time, Tom?
But not now. It's not now.
Oh, no. In Canada, there's like a very specific mustache that only soldiers would wear. It looks very dorky, but it is something that only you see soldiers, especially officers, wearing.
I must say,
first as tragedy, then as farce, then as farce of the farce.
I must say, my uncle. I have an uncle who lives in Australia who is an asshole, and he's my only relative I actually don't like. But he was, he joined the Australian army to get visa, a green card or whatever in Australia, and he had. Now that I just think about it, he did have a goddamn old-fashioned mustache thing for a while when he was in the army. That's freaky. Yeah.
Holy shit! So I just reread that sentence in Swedish, and it has a word I was not familiar with. It's knavelbor, and I was like, I have no, because it means knivel drill, and I was like, what the fuck is a knivel? So I just thought it was some kind of military instrument, but I Googled it, and apparently it's a very specific mustache. It's the mustache, where you have the twirls like that. It's the long mustache.
The Stalin mustache? You mean specifically the Stalin mustache?
No, the Stalin mustache was like a slug. It's thick and no, this is the waxed one where you have these twirls that go out and doing, doing.
Yeah, that's the type my uncle had.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the Swedish translation, that is the specific mustache.
Wow. See, okay, because I'm getting carnival mustache when I when I Google it. So how do you spell this?
In Swedish?
Yeah.
Oh fuck, yeah, man! I even
that's okay.
No one has ever heard of this word. I can promise you, not appeared since the 1930s when this was translated.
Okay.
Knavelbor, and it means knivel drill. And
all right,
I've looked up knivel drill. It doesn't exist.
Right?
Oh my god!
Oh.
I looked it up.
Just the word knavel. I have no fucking clue what that is. It's some kind of archaic shit. But it's that is the specific mustache, which I suppose was super popular at the time with semi-aristocratic officers or whatever.
Yeah, when I Google Snivel Bor with mustache, the first top thing I get is hashtag Stern mustache wax. Instagram.
Look at this. On Google, I've managed to find a thing where you put two words beside each other and there's no thing on the internet. Knivel drill mustache does not exist in Google. It's extremely rare. You put any two words beside each other, they will always give you a response. Give me two random words. Esri, give me a word.
Okay, so I need
porcupine.
To what the fuck a knavel is.
Porcupine,
so
and
it is a.
And give me, Emmanuel, give me a random word. Emmanuel, give me a random word.
A random word. Snivel.
Snivel. Porcupine snivel. Let's have a look. There you go. Loads of shit. Snivel is a purple and orange anteater / porcupine hybrid. What the fuck?
There you go.
There you go.
What? The snivel?
There you go. So that's extremely rare. I haven't done that in years where I actually don't get anything. Okay, let's keep going. Fucking hell. We're going to about 20 minutes on this. Okay. So we're going to get on here to talk about the election of What are we talking about here? Now, 1 second.
Louis Napoleon?
Yeah,
Louis Bonaparte?
Yeah. Okay, and we're going to talk about we're going to get into the dissolution of the... Are we getting into the dissolution of the motherfucker here? What is this bit here? Sorry, 1 second. I think this is about how they destroyed the Constituent National Assembly, which was like a rehearsal for Bonaparte of trying to get rid of the National Assembly. So this was like part one of, which was actually undertaken by the, what you call them, by the Party of Order against the Constituent Assembly. Okay, so who wants to read this bit? Kyle, have you read today? Not really, not too much. Oh, you have.
Yeah, I did some reading, but I could do one more.
Emmanuel? Has Emmanuel read?
Emmanuel, he hasn't read yet.
Emmanuel's audio is a bit dodge. There's kind of some chat in the background.
Okay, I'll read it. It's no problem.
Yeah.
So it is sufficient is the beginning thing here. All right. It is sufficient to remark here that it was a reaction of the peasants who had to pay the costs of the February Revolution against the remaining classes of the nation, a reaction of the country against the town. It met with great approval in the army, for which the Republicans of the National had provided neither glory nor additional pay. Among the big bourgeoisie, which hailed Bonaparte as a bridge to monarchy, among the proletarians and the petty bourgeois, who hailed him as a scourge for Cavaignac. I shall have an opportunity later of going more closely into the relationship of the peasants to the French Revolution. The period from December 20, 1848 until the dissolution of the Constituent Assembly in May 1849 comprises the history of the downfall of the bourgeois republicans. After having founded a republic for the bourgeoisie, driven the revolutionary proletariat out of the field, and reduced the democratic petty bourgeoisie to silence for the time being, they are themselves thrust aside by the mass of the bourgeoisie, which justly impounds this republic as its property. This bourgeois mass was, however, royalist. One section of it, the large landowners, had ruled during the Restoration and was accordingly legitimist. The other, the aristocrats of finance and big industrialists, had ruled during the July monarchy and was consequently Orleanist. The high dignitaries of the army, the university, the church, the bar, the academy, and the press were to be found on either side, though in various proportions. Here, in the bourgeois republic, which bore neither the name Bourbon nor the name Orleans, but the name capital, they had found the form of the state in which they could rule conjointly. The June insurrection had already united them in the party of order. Now it was necessary, in the first place, to remove the coterie of bourgeois republicans who still occupied the seats of the National Assembly. Just as brutal as these pure republicans had been in their misuse of physical force against the people, just as cowardly, mealy-mouthed, broken-spirited, and incapable of fighting were they now in their retreat, when it was a question of maintaining their republicanism and their legislative rights against the executive power and the royalists. I need not relate here the ignominious history of their dissolution. They did not succumb. They passed out of existence. Their history has come to an end forever, and both inside and outside the assembly, they figure in the following period only as memories that seem to regain life whenever the mere name republic is once more the issue, and as often as the the revolutionary conflict threatens to sink down to the lowest level. I may remark in passing that the journal which gave its name to this party, the National, was converted to socialism in the following period.
Like, I know it's maybe not like the most, serious commentary response to just be like air horns, oh shit, he's a sassy bitch. But I mean, air horns, oh shit, he's a sassy bitch. Like this. What's really amazing though is that Marx is speaking as basically a sort of ex-Republican. And there are people that deny that he has this phase, but when he's young, when he's part of the young Hegelians, and to be a Republican in the context of, Germany at that time was a very radical position. And, so it's not so much of shame. It's just something that Marx grows out of. Marx is the central thinker that, like
when he was editor of the Rheinische Zeitung, that he was making liberal points, and he was getting disillusioned with the liberal points, but he was, of course, he was in that process of moving through it at that, in 1841 or whatever.
Yeah, you can't really understand Marx without thinking of him as a post-Republican thinker, like somebody for whom they believe in an old Republican spirit, but like it can't be achieved the way Republicans want to stamp virtue onto a social body, even though it's supposed to be a representative sort of stamp of virtue. There needs to be something vastly different. This is especially in its, abstracted liberal bourgeois form that isn't really taking the social revolution into account. Like this is a farce. This is at best an echo of history. And at worst, it delivers you what the old republic was delivered to.
This is amazing republic in which you can have the legitimists and the Orleanists rule conjointly. Just set aside those family feuds.
What legitimists and Orleanists are?
So the legitimists are those that support the Bourbon royal family, the original one before the original revolution, and they are essentially landed gentry. And then the Orleanists are the branch that are basically backed by largely finance and the big industrialists. So it's kind of like replaying the British, the corn laws kind of thing of the landed gentry fighting the upper and coming bourgeoisie. Okay,
let's talk real quick, or like kind of like discuss like the when I read this, and then when I listen to the Mike Duncan podcast on this revolution, I couldn't help but think about the point that McNair made in our other reading series about when you have like a revolution, you don't invite like the former power that you conquered to govern with you. And yet what did this republic do precisely? They did precisely that, which it just is baffling. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, to an extent they had to, because they had this universal suffrage, and that's how the votes sort of went, right?
Is that implied by universal suffrage? Does universal suffrage mean you can allow like the former governing powers to run? Because like I don't know if that necessarily applies, but maybe I'm misunderstanding something.
No, I think it's more the kind of Republican principles that they were basing their government on, which also caused them to allow the socialists into the election too, right? The kind of universalism that they brought in. It kind of implied that. So yeah, I think you're right. These are separate issues.
Yeah, but I think you're right as well. And I think what it also makes me call into question is that I think, if I remember correctly, McNair made the point that in prior revolutions that has been the case. And maybe he said, there might be some exceptions, but this is a pretty big exception in my mind.
Okay.
To pivot, there's a pretty hefty little chunk of meat here. Something that you might recognize from the manifesto embedded here is, a reaction of the town a reaction of the country against the town. Here it's juxtaposed and more or less equated to a reaction of the peasants who have to pay the cost for the February Revolution against the remaining classes of the nation. However, you know, it's not hard to abstract that from that specific composition of like class forces to the general dynamic of core and periphery within a nation, the town and the country, the reaction of the country against the town. If there is a real rhyme from the 18th Brumaire to the United States today, it's based on this. This is the ultimate underlying law of history dynamic, whatever.
Yeah, I think what this made me remind of, what this reminded me of is that, like, it made me call into question a kind of, like, Maoist or post-Maoist idea that, like, the lumpen proletariat kind of represents the analog to the peasantry, and that they are the ones who are going to surround the cities or whatever, when in reality, like, a more accurate analog to the peasantry isn't the lumpen proletariat in, like, the urban cities, but rather the rural people living in a very rural town outside of Phoenix. I can testify to this. You know, they are going to represent the kind of backwards looking reaction. And in a lot of ways for, you know, mom and pop shops and all that kind of stuff, like there is a material self-interest in why they're doing that. They're not just like dupes, you know, who are tricked into supporting policies that don't benefit them. They are backwards looking because they see, you know, Walmart's and Big O Tire Company moving in and closing down all the mom and pop stores and all the mom and pop mechanics. The guy I talked to yesterday is a case in point.
Yeah.
The guy you talked to yesterday?
Mechanic I talked to yesterday. Sorry. I should have been more specific, but I didn't want to get into a big story about it.
Tell us more. Tell us more.
Yeah, I think it's a good story, actually.
Well, my car had problems. I took it in to get work done, and I just went to the first shop in Google Maps, and it was 5 minutes away. And I went in wearing my bandana as like a, you know, cloth mask, and he kind of gave me this weird look. But then I asked him about business, and then we got into all kinds of stuff like race and the pandemic and the response to the pandemic. And I have experience through Rennick Revolt and kind of doing counter recruitment work. So my training in that just kind of kicked in, and I started talking to him about these things. And he's just kind of like your vague libertarian, but he's not like a committed capital L libertarian, you know? He's like, Esri brought up the idea of like liberty is his culture, or libertarianism is his culture, you know? Like he, and his self-interest is like, he basically works here and there might be like one other employee and it's just him in this shop and he works on people's cars and that's his livelihood. And one of the things he said that's very salient to this discussion and the idea of like rural people being a more accurate analog to the peasantry is he was talking about tire shops, and he just admitted, because I need new tires, he just admitted that I'd be better off going to Big O Tire or one of the discount tires that just moved in because I could get a better deal. But it's sad that, you know, all the tire shops that have been around since he was a child have all closed down, you know. But he still recommended I go to the big place because it's the best price he could get, you know.
Was he factoring in the fuel? That's what I want to know.
Factoring in the fuel.
I don't know, Tom. That doesn't seem like the most important part of that story.
Yeah.
Hey, don't you undermine me here. Don't you? I'll kick you off this stream.
You never take anything seriously.
Price of oil tanks, and Tom is most concerned about the price of gas.
Oh God.
Peak oil, babies, peak oil.
Of any of us here, no.
Right here, I'm going to keep going because let's try and get this goddamn thing done by tonight.
You got to feel me on town and country, though. It's in the manifesto. You got to transcend it in a way that doesn't look like suburbia, because we have a negative example of how not to do it.
And Sophie, thanks so much for that story. I think it encapsulates a lot of where not only the U.S. is at the moment, but things we easily lose track of when we enter in these deep discussions about dialectics in our chambers, and we tend to forget that people working on tires is like literally where the rubber meets the road, as it were.
Yeah. I mean, we don't think of, intellectuals don't think about the working class and don't understand. I mean, think about the working class in the abstract. Don't understand the working class. And like any intellectual, like any self-respecting intellectual, is trying everything they can do to not slip into the proletariat. Like, that would be the point of making that your career. Like, so there's a reason that we don't hear stories like that. Marxists aren't interested in telling stories like that anymore.
Well, and let's be more frank and honest. Like, this guy is technically PB as like an owner of a business. I mean, maybe I misread him, but I'm pretty sure he was the owner. But he was the only person I ever interacted with, and he was the one working in my car as well. And that's, maybe he doesn't have employers, and then that puts the whole categorization into like iffy territory. But
no, that's true.
That's for our next reading series.
Marx's point here later is that fuck you, city people. It turns out farmers are royalists, and they really like it when the president said that he was going to give them social security and shit. Like, screw you.
Right, let's get there. Let's get there. Okay, I'm going to read this next bit around. Okay, so this is going down through how the Constituent National Assembly was undermined. Okay, okay. So let me have a read here. The very first meeting of the Council of Ministers resolved on the expedition to Rome, which it was agreed should be undertaken behind the back of the National Assembly, and the means for which were to be wrested from it under false pretenses. Thus they began by swindling the National Assembly and secretly conspiring with the absolutist powers abroad against the revolutionary Roman Republic. In the same manner and with the same manoeuvres, Bonaparte prepared its coup of December the 2nd against the Royalist Legislative Assembly and its constitutional republic. Let us not forget that the same party which formed Bonaparte's ministry on December 20th, 1848, formed the majority of the Legislative National Assembly on December the 2nd, 1851. In August, the Constituent Assembly had decided to dissolve only after it had worked out and promulgated a whole series of organic laws which were to supplement the Constitution. On 6th of January 1849, the Party of Order had a deputy named Rateau moved that the Assembly should let the organic laws go, and rather than decide on its own, let the organic laws go and rather decide on its own dissolution. Not only the ministry, with Odilon Barrot at its head, but all the royalist members of the National Assembly told it in bullying accents that then its dissolution was necessary for the restoration of credit, for the consolidation of order, for putting an end to the indefinite provisional arrangements and establishing a definitive state of affairs, that it hampered the productivity of the new government and sought to prolong its existence merely out of malice, that the country was tired of it. Bonaparte took note of all this invective against the legislative power, learnt it by heart, and proved to the parliamentary royalists on December 2nd, 1851, that he had learned from them. He repeated their own catchwords against them. The Barrot ministry and the Party of Order went further. They caused petitions to the National Assembly to be made throughout France, in which this body was politely requested to decamp. They thus led the unorganized popular masses into the fire of battle against the National Assembly, the constitutionally organized expression of the people. They taught Bonaparte to appeal against the parliamentary assemblies to the people. At length, on January 29, 1849, the day had come on which the Constituent Assembly was to decide concerning its own dissolution. The National Assembly found the building where its sessions were held occupied by the military. Changarnier, the general of the Party of Order, in whose hands the supreme command of the National Guard and troops of the line had been united, held a great military review in Paris, as if a battle were impending, and the royalists in coalition threateningly declared to the Constituent Assembly that force would be employed if it should prove unwilling. It was willing, and only bargained for a very short extra term of life. What was January the 29th but the coup d'etat of December 2nd, 1851, only carried out by the royalists with Bonaparte against the Republican National Assembly? The gentleman did not observe, or did not wish to observe, that Bonaparte availed of himself of January the 29th, 1849, to have a portion of the troops march past him in front of the Tuileries, and seized with avidity on just this, the first public summoning of the military power against the parliamentary power, to foreshadow Caligula. They, to be sure, only saw only their Changarnier. Okay.
I mean, goddamn.
It's very
so much to unpack there, but yeah.
It's very interesting coming through Brexit and Boris Johnson completely played to the people above and against Parliament. Like, it's the first time in my political life, like in Britain or in Ireland, where I've seen the basically play against Parliament, and
So, you know what I thought of when reading this? Because it's funny you should say that, but I thought immediately of Margaret Thatcher and neoliberalism. If only we got rid of the red tape. There are so many innovative people out there, and we have the cure against Corona.
But
everything is dandy. It's just these goddamn regulations and all this bickering and debate getting in the way of actual decisions. Like,
yeah, I think
to me, this sounds like predicting Milton Friedman way before his time.
But this kind of sounds like Dongism, though.
I think what you're saying, though, Emmanuel, though, that kind of neoliberal thing is more of against legislation as against the Parliament. It's like these legislations were like when Boris Johnson was doing it, it was explicitly the Parliament against the people. They explicitly would say those lines. The Parliament is the enemy of the people. And so like that's why I think it's even more so than that kind of neoliberal shift. Which is
I don't know why, Emmanuel, but all I was really hearing is, Daddy G, save us from, deliberation. Like, because the way that China has ended up looking, even though, they did keep their working class in such a precarious and, like just such a precarious position that it generated a crazy ass virus. And if you think there's something racist about saying that happened in the UK and in the United States at certain periods of their production where they had a similar place in the manufacturing, global pecking order. So, be materialist about it. Like, even though they did that, like, even though China allowed this to happen, and they have tended to politically have played this off well, because China was able to do some real hardcore shit that that few elected governments can do, to try to stamp down on coronavirus. They did, for some pretty draconian things.
It's the age-old debate of democracy versus a dictatorship is that
right.
A democracy has to slow things down by necessity in order to get things checked and voted on, etc., etc. So democracy is all about slowing things down,
right,
and all about checks and balances. Whereas a dictatorship can do whatever the fuck they want, and they're
right now,
defenders of fascism or Stalinism will frequently use that argument. And in times of crisis, you need a firm hand, etc. Which is kind of what I what I got from this text, that we need decisive action in this country, and the parliament is only keeping us back.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I especially I love this part about Bonaparte being like the sneaky bastard in the background, just listening into the accusations about not being on the side of the true people. We have this with the conservative parties in Sweden as well, where they, like 10 years ago, they started on this campaign with, no one listens to the real people in the streets, like you know call up your grandma and see what she thinks about abortion and the gays, right? People don't like the gays. Actually, this is a city phenomenon, right? These are the goddamn
decadence.
This is a city phenomenon. If you go out in the country and ask real people, they're good,
the salt of the earth,
which is of course complete bullshit, because that turns out that is actually totally not the case, but it's a really good myth. And so I really like the story about Bonaparte being like, well, yeah, all right, maybe you're right. Maybe I should go to the country and show them what a good army I have, and let them be best buddies.
Well, it reminds me a lot of the establishment Republicans giving way to the Tea Party, giving way to Trump. It's a similar dynamic. Interestingly, the Democrats have not pursued this sort of course of action. They have been entirely stalwart in like circling the wagons, more or less. In saying like, no, we will not turn the people against Congress. Absolutely not.
Yeah, like I'm of two minds of this, because of course, like, thinking about this in the context of Leninism, thinking about this in the context of fascism, there is a sort of Sorelian edge to this, like class resentment and like regional sort of tension, that like is deep in the heart of reactionary authoritarianism, and specifically not like really a revolutionary kind. Like this is really where it comes from. Like in a lot of these, like if you're gonna like try to draw out laws of history or whatever, and like I don't know, we don't have Marx's view of Stalinism. You know what I mean? We just don't have it. But we have, I think, enough in his political writings to tell us what he would have thought about it. Like the way the Stalin plays off the peasantry, and then liquidates them, makes it, a little more complex. But like, this is essentially the appeal of authoritarian, totalitarian systems. Like, and it's weird today because we have a more like, I don't know, libertarian sort of aspect in the United States, in the town and country divide or something. But like the whole appeal, this is something that goes back to Bakunin and Bakunin's read of the peasantry. The reason that the peasantry like the king is because the king is a check on the big bourgeoisie and the people that are trying to displace the peasants. And and Lassalle, the old hero of the German socialist labor movement, wanted to leverage the czar against the bourgeoisie. So there's this whole like core in socialist history that Marx is trying to stake out another position from.
Yeah, and this is what I think many people in the outside of constitutional monarchies don't get, is that people in the UK, a lot of people in the UK really love the Queen and the royal house, etc., and are like obsessed about it. In Sweden, people aren't obsessed about the royal family as much, but people are like neutrally, either they don't care or they're like cautiously positive, and there is a faction among the left to which I'm actually quite sympathetic, that are like cautiously pro-monarchy for this precise reason, is that it is the one thing that the bourgeoisie can privatize. Because like the royal family owns a lot of like national parks and stuff, that if the monarchy didn't still own those lands, like the bourgeoisie would have privatized that and put up malls there instead of, and just, you know, ram the forests to the ground and build Walmarts or whatever. Like it is the one thing that the nation shares as a common cultural thing, and a communal memory, like, and a communal identity that even the neoliberals do not dare to touch. Like that really resonates with people.
I used to be a monarchist social democrat, but I really threw all that out the window with the prorogation of Parliament and the just the utter pathetic weakness of monarchical power in the face of an insurgent neoliberal bourgeoisie.
Yeah, I mean, there, you know, the U.S., for all of its flaws, doesn't have a monarchy, and you know, somehow has some national parks, in spite of it being like a neoliberal shithole worse than a lot of other countries. If I do toot my own shit stain horn. But I wanted to circle back around to something that Ezra said earlier about the kind of like libertarian edge of the American kind of core periphery division or rural urban division, as like an analogy for the peasantry and the workers, industrial workers. I think while there is like a kind of cultural libertarianism that I was referencing earlier, there is still this kind of identification with the strong man, and like a frustration at the bureaucrats gunning up the works, and they just want a strong man to get things done. God damn it, you know. And that's why, you know, Trump has this still has an appeal to that kind of person, even though he pretty quickly abandoned his populist position. I mean, and now for campaign reasons, in my opinion, he's pivoted back to that a little bit with stimulus and his kind of rhetoric about wanting temporary Medicare for all. But I think it's all smoke and mirrors still, you know. But as long as he has the appearance of the strong man, his positions really don't matter, because it's all superficial, really.
Okay, Kyle, do you want to take a handle on the last paragraph to wrap it up?
Sure. After the Constituent Assembly had itself shattered its last weapon on January 29, 1849, the Ballot Ministry and the Friends of Order hounded it to death, left nothing undone that could humiliate it, and wrested from the impotent, self-despairing Assembly laws that cost it the last remnant of respect in the eyes of the public. Bonaparte, occupied with his fixed Napoleonic idea, was brazen enough to exploit publicly this degradation of the parliamentary power. For when on May 8, 1849, the National Assembly passed a vote of censure of the ministry because of the occupation of Civita Vecchia by Oudinot, and ordered it to bring back the Roman expedition to its alleged purpose, Bonaparte published the same evening in the Moniteur a letter to Oudinot in which he congratulated him on his heroic exploits, and in contrast to the ink-slinging parliamentarians already posed as the generous protector of the army. The royalists smiled at this. They regarded him simply as their dupe. Finally, when Marat, the president of the Constituent Assembly, believed for a moment that the safety of the National Assembly was endangered, and relying on the Constitution, requisitioned a colonel and his regiment. The colonel declined, cited discipline in his support, and referred Marat to Changarnier, who scornfully refused him with the remark that he did not like bayonet intelligent, intellectual bayonets. In November 1851, when the Royalists in coalition wanted to begin the decisive struggle with Bonaparte, they sought to put through in their notorious Quaestors Bill the principle of the direct requisition of troops by the President of the National Assembly. One of their generals, Le Flot, had signed the bill. In vain did Changarnier vote for it, and Triel pay homage to the far-sighted wisdom of the former Constituent Assembly. The War Minister, Saint-Arnaud, answered him as Changarnier had answered Marat, and to the acclamation of the Montagne. Thus, the party of order, when it was not yet the National Assembly, when it was still only the ministry, had itself stigmatized the parliamentary regime, and it makes an outcry when December 2nd, 1851 banishes this regime from France. We wish it a happy journey.
Bam!
Damn.
Yeah, so in 1851, when the National Assembly, Marx is saying here, started to get worried for themselves, they tried to bring in a bill saying that they could requisition troops. Basically, the army did exactly the same thing to them as they were happy to see happen to the Constituent National Assembly 3 or 4 years before. So, like, the exact same history repeated itself. First time as tragedy, second time as farce, but both times as farce here, let's be honest. But yeah, so we've gone the whole gamut here today of like actually talking about how the pure Republicans fell from being an ultimate power to basically under the foot of Napoleon Bonaparte. No, Louis Bonaparte.
Louis Napoleon Bonaparte.
Yeah. Anything to say about this last paragraph then? By anybody?
Maybe don't post hoc try to assume the powers of the commander-in-chief. It's pretty bold move there. But they already thrown out the constitutional process, so whatever, right?
Well, it comes off as desperate, and it seems like it makes perfect sense to me that the generals and the leaders of the military would be like, nah, we're not doing that. Like, how could you expect military men to respect your kind of like last minute groveling for military support? Like, you clearly don't really hold any power. So no, we're not going to listen to you.
Yeah. And there's there's a lot of things we can criticize the Bolsheviks for, but they certainly took their lessons from this.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, they weren't like, yeah, we're not going to like invite you to help govern. Actually, we're probably just going to kill a bunch of you so you don't exist anymore. And even though this wasn't a decision made in the higher ranks, this was the logic behind it, killing the entire royal family. You don't even want to invite like the spirit of this in there. I mean, that also comes from the old French Revolution. But yeah, the Bolsheviks did learn that. But on the other hand, on lower levels of power in bureaucracy, the Bolsheviks found it necessary to recruit a lot of the old functionaries. So it's still a mixed legacy.
Definitely.
Well, we wish you a happy journey.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. This is pretty spicy.
Oh yeah, just destroyed.
Yeah.
Sassy beef.
Can you believe we made it through a whole chapter in one day?
I can believe it when it took 2 hours.
Yeah. It was a bit of a wandering road, but we did make it. We made it.
Yeah, what was it? Porcupine something?
Snivel?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a new one. I don't know. I guess the last thing I guess I would have to say is this. It's because we keep talking about farce. There's this Jean Baudrillard quote that says, "History that repeats itself turns to farce, but a farce that repeats itself ends up making a history." Like the process that you see happening, you know, like what we're generalizing about from the 18th Brumaire is this, like, you know, scarily enough, like seemingly the only thing that can like marshal forces into, you know, some kind of state that reminds us of the old revolts, like at all, is in this direction. How do we handle this? You know, what do intelligent, you know, Marxists are trying to do, you know, something different than the past do about this? Or dumb Marxists, you know, not just the smart ones, you know, all of us.
Because, like, during the first chapter, I could not get the picture of like tankies out of my head. Reading that, where like, you know, these farcical parodies of revolutionaries, like LARPers, have to call upon the ghosts of previous revolutions that has shit fuck to do with whatever they think they're doing, to for legitimacy. I mean, goddamn, that was a there was a real, like, just bung rip take on current like internet commie politics.
God.
So yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, and this is, I mean, the sort of history repeats itself cliche. Like, reading this, you're like, fuck, haven't we learned anything from this?
Well, like, so I do think that the point about the tankies is well taken, absolutely. But when we look at how the proletariat and the socialists behave in this narrative here, like, the whole thing kicks off with them losing, right? And really, Marx's advice, it boils down to, yeah, don't like waste your powers with a series of futile and ever diminishing revolts. If we look at the actual advice that Marx gives to the socialists in this.
Yeah, he's essentially saying, like, gather yourselves and your power before you act.
Right, after you get your ass kicked the first time, like, maybe step back and kind of regroup and look towards, like, long game, not short game, you know?
I think he even goes further than that, because he even says, like, that the proletariat in this time could never have done anything in France. He says that, like, I think, is it at the start of this section or at the end of last week's, where he basically goes, you know, they got their asses kicked as they only could have gotten their. It's the only thing that could have happened. Yeah. So, like,
the fuck did you expect, Occupy? I mean, not to be you know, not to be too hot takey about this, but like, I just pictured, you know, a tanky meme lord in their basement reading that, and like,
I think we have one in the chat that believes that Marx would have defended the Stalin's terrors, but go on.
Yeah, maybe no, but like just like you said, Tom, that, you know, what the and Karl as well. It starts off with a socialist defeat, right? We, you know, we had a social democrat defeat in the Democratic Party very recently, with Bernie Sanders dropping off and so on. And you know, the last century really has been a series of socialist defeats, where the masses, you know, failed, and just history of failed revolutions and failed revolts, etc. And reading that first chapter, not to derail this discussion to a former chapter, but still reading that chapter, I thought, like, especially when it talks about the sort of pessimism that comes out of it, and the anger after failed attempts and so on. I was like, okay, I can think of no decade in which that is not relevant to the left, and I can think of no decade where the left has actually learned anything from that chapter. Like, maybe I'm being overly pessimistic, but like
I don't think you are. I mean, I think again, to really double down on this phrase, it's become one of my favorite phrases recently. Look for the laws of motion of these sorts of milieu, or these, political scenes, or I don't know how to describe this, because it's actually broader than our little our little stupid microcultures that we have. Like, there were broader socialists, like, milieu at one point that had, something more serious, but they also didn't necessarily learn these things, like, so it's something we sort of have to assume going in, that and it's going to help orient Marxists to theorize about this and take this on as part of our theoretical challenge of what makes it so difficult to act, what makes it so difficult to follow through on something that seems relatively straightforward. Why?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's bring this offline. But I think a little bit of it is like, I think that Marx, if he was looking back at what happened in Russia, he would say similar things to them at the start. He would say, "Oh, your forces both aren't good enough because internationally they're not good enough. Hold your fire, lads." I think, looking at what happened in this, it would seem to me he would say exactly the same thing. And the error, when it followed a weird meandering different path, which kind of goes Bonapartist from a commie point of view. But basically, the enemy of socialists are their leaders. Not in a kind of a crappy anarchist way. I just mean, like, leaders want to be the figurehead and they want to get power, and they're willing to take that extra risk at the certain times. How can we stop, like, leaders jumping because they can see, chance of being like a socialist leader ahead of the time when it needs to be done? I think that is a really tough problem. Like, that's like nearly a human nature problem, as opposed to, I know it's strategic, but it's also like, how do you get around that kind of problem? To me, that's a big, tough one. Like, you really have to, like, indoctrinate everybody within a large internationalist socialist grouping about that importance. That's a big unknowable. Anyway, here, let's take.
And if you want a monarchy to fail, just have a failed revolution and get shot down.
That's true.
Well,
just mow them out of it. Mow them out of it in a failed revolution. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's take it offline. We're on 2 hours, 15 minutes. I'm going to have to edit this motherfucker. Let's say goodbye to all those in the chat, except the Stalinists. Bye there now. That's you, old man, damn it. Who else do we have? Jake P, Coco, Benjamin Hanshu, Grimlock, and Diazi, and Werner. Werner, Patreon. So thanks everybody for coming on the show. Let's do a group goodbye.
All
right. Bye. We wish you a happy journey.
We wish you a happy journey.
Where?
Death to Stalin.
Yeah.
Well, good news on that front.
Yeah, where are we going? I was thinking earlier, is like, history repeats itself. We should call this podcast series just called it History. That'd be a good title, wouldn't it? By now.
Maybe.